All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Because Football Podcast. This is your host, Coach Andrew. Today, our guest is Pete Woolcock. Pete is originally of Exeter, England. He is currently calling to us from Taiwan, but he's based in Chiang Mai, Thailand, as he and his wife and child are trying out the digital nomad working remotely lifestyle. So after graduating from university in 2008, Pete has embarked on a career in sports for development, particularly through football. He's worked and lived in places like China, the UK, India, the United States, and now Thailand. His experiences have all revolved around sport and football, ranging from starting grassroots initiatives to working on the London 2012 Olympics. And currently, Pete is working as a consultant, trying to support clubs with their operations and particularly with fan match day experiences and fan engagement. After that great introduction, Pete, welcome to the podcast.
Andrew, thank you. Thanks for having me. Looking forward to chatting with you.
Yeah, it's a pleasure, and glad we were able to connect. And so, I know you being from Exeter. We've talked about our similar interests in current emphasis on current League One clubs. Yours being Exeter City, mine being Port Vale, and I think that would lead me into kind of the first thing I'm curious about to ask you here is like, what would you say is your first memory of football? Maybe sports in general, but certainly of football. And if you had to think now, what's kind of the first thing that comes to mind?
Yeah, definitely. My first strongest memory is being taken to an Exeter City game. I must have been around about 9 or 10, and it came about through a really good friend of mine's dad actually taking me. So my friend didn't want to go, so his dad reached out to my parents and said, "Hey, would Pete want to go to go and watch Exeter?" And I said yes. I'd never been to a game at this point before. My parents weren't as interested in football, but yeah, I was definitely keen to go. And I remember it so vividly walking down. I actually lived very close to the stadium, so it was a 10-minute walk down, and arriving at the stadium. And back then, we had a very old, pretty dilapidated, corrugated iron stadium exterior that, to be honest, looked pretty rough and not very inviting. But just the kind of going through a turnstile for the very first time, and that memory was so vivid and exciting. And then the atmosphere, the smells. Got the kind of classic burgers being cooked and stuff like that. And it was actually a Devon derby, so it was against our arch rivals, Plymouth Argyle. And I just remember, walking up into the stand and just the atmosphere, and it was probably a good sort of 30 minutes before kickoff, was just incredible. And all of the Argyle fans, as we call them, were off in the away end, and the away end was absolutely packed. And at Exeter, it's a pretty small stadium, and the away section is the only area back then that was not covered, didn't have a roof on it.
Okay.
It was just open to the elements. It was standing only, and it was absolutely just packed full of fans. And I remember the advertising boards that kind of go around around the stadium. Back then, they were just sort of wooden boards. And I saw some stewards that were basically just carrying pieces of advertising boards because the Plymouth Argyle fans were just like kicking them and just like breaking them apart. And I was like, what is going on? And it was just a really intense sort of atmosphere at the start of the game. Incredible game. I remember one of our players at the time, his name was Noel Blake, who was just a very intense physical player, sort of squaring up. I think he got sent off at one point. I'm pretty sure we lost the game.
Got him in a derby. There has to be at least one sending off, right?
It was great. But yeah, I mean, the strongest sort of memory that comes to mind, and I was hooked. I mean, that really is what took me. I just loved the experience, and then became a lifelong Exeter City fan after that, and started going to the games more and more regularly. And the rest is history. But an incredible first experience at a game. So
yeah, I mean, to be a young kid and have a derby, or as we would say in the U.S., a rivalry as your first game. I mean, the the level would just be, I mean, if it was not that, you would still have a feeling of, wow, this is something totally new. This is a new world I've stepped into. But especially with the Derby atmosphere, I can't imagine that. And being a kid, like probably thinking it was cool and terrifying that the opposition fans were destroying things in the stadium. I can imagine that feeling. So awesome. And so, so then you're hooked with Exeter, I imagine being so close to the stadium, it's just kind of really a part of your life. When did you kind of get or not a when, but like from your childhood and from being a part of Exeter, like how did you see kind of the connection with football and the community? Because I think that's something that, in many countries in the world, around the world, there is a really close connection between the local club and that surrounding community. In the United States, we're used to professional teams or franchises, and it's like bigger markets, so you can feel it and extend it. But in the UK, for example, you can be talking about just a few thousand, a couple dozen thousand of people. So, what is that like? Just like growing up in like in a smaller community and a smaller club like that.
Yeah, I think it's accessibility, right? I think it was the great thing about Exeter for me. It was very close, obviously, to my house, so it was easy to, I could walk to the stadium, but also it was very cost effective. It didn't cost a lot to go and watch
Mm-hmm.
Exeter, and that I think is huge, and that was a big part of my experience going there was how this was just very affordable. Um, and I used to, I used to go with friends. I would actually sometimes go on my own as well, which I think, for some people that's maybe a strange thing to do in any sort of scenario. But I used to love actually going on my own, and you would start to sort of, connect with a few people around you. I used to actually, growing up, I never really used to play football. I was actually a water polo player. I got into water polo at a young age.
Okay.
So I used to have water polo training on a Tuesday night, and it would start later in the evening. So and Tuesday night was typically when we used to have games as well at Exeter. So I'd go go to Exeter for the first half, leave, and then go to training afterwards. But yeah, I used to love the camaraderie and the sort of the banter with people in and around
Mm-hmm.
in the stand that I used to go stand, because it was an all standing stand that we had. But yeah, I think Exeter have done a great job, and it's gotten better and better over the years. It used to be like, I think all football was always so male dominated, but I think
Mm-hmm.
they've really leaned in heavily into making it more of a family friendly environment.
Sure.
And so I think that's been great over the years to sort of see how that sort of changed. But yeah, I think to come back to it's about accessibility and about being affordable, and Exeter was both of those.
And so, you had that background of kind of supporting your local club, but then you ended up moving on eventually to places like China, to India, to the United States. Now you're in Thailand. Like, can you remember maybe when you started to kind of turn that gaze from the local to maybe international, and what it was that kind of piqued that interest for you?
Yeah, definitely. I think when I was so yeah, growing up, through going through school, and definitely academics was an area that I really struggled at. Was not didn't get the didn't get the element of learning, and probably didn't take it that seriously. And really struggled at school, and
Mhm.
struggled with examinations and things like that. But sport was always something that was at the side for me, which was just such a great support. And like I mentioned before, I played water polo, and water polo presented me a lot of great opportunities. So went on to college, and then went on to university. But it was really then when I got even more opportunities to start going and traveling, and it was all sport sort of related. And that, really was the finished high school, as secondary school as we call it in the UK, when I was 16. Then I got a great opportunity to join an actual water polo academy, the first of its kind in the UK, up in the Midlands, which was around 6-7 hours away from home. And that was a big jump, leaving home at 16 and going and living on my own, and training as much as a professional water polo player as I could be at that point. but an incredible opportunity and experience. And really, that was when I started to take the academics a little bit more seriously and got some study a little bit more into sport management, sport education. And that then enabled me to go on to university. And really, it was at university where I started to get some really unique opportunities. The first was one of our lecturers coming to us one day and presenting this great opportunity to travel down to Namibia, in the south of Africa,
Yeah, Southwest Africa.
to go and do. Yeah, we were looking to do a cross-cultural program with a university down there, and they were working with some local organizations. And I jumped at that opportunity. We had to apply. We had to go through an interview process, but went and spent it was about a couple of months down in Namibia that one summer working with Special Olympics. And that's really when it just opened my eyes to this, world of sport and using sport for development and sport for good. That those experiences were transformational, but they were just great opportunities. And then back to university, we had another time where we were asked to look for work experience. And a lot of people, when you look at work experience, you maybe look locally, speak to clubs or leagues and local authorities. But again, I kind of just cast my net as wide as I could and reached out to a ton of different water polo, at that point, water polo groups around the world. And this guy in Australia reached back to me and said, "Hey, if you can get yourself to Australia, you can come and spend a couple of weeks with our women's national team," as they were preparing then for the 2008 Beijing Olympics. So
Nice.
I got a grant from the university and took myself over to Australia and spent about a month following the team and supporting the team through various training camps, which was just an incredible experience, and got to go to Canberra, where they have the Australian Institute of Sport, and just to see how Australia produces their sort of sporting success, which they're very good at, was just another good experience. So I attribute so much of my opportunities down to sport, and I'm so thankful for those. And really, if I hadn't have gotten into sports like water polo or an interest in football, my path would have been very different.
I think to me, what stands out is like that if you had maybe had that courage to try it, or that little bit of, whether it's a taste for adventure or just to experience something new, that's kind of a big piece. I think that's something that, for me, also being a traveler, the objective, really obvious example is going other places, right? But I think if people aren't necessarily as interested in that, it can be just putting yourself in situations where you may fail and try to get, but maybe you have a certain passion or desire to do something. And so I think that probably underlying a lot of your experiences was that kind of, that just overall courage, that willingness to try something new, and wherever that kind of came from for you. So I think that's awesome. And then so you had the experience in Australia being put in, I'm sure that was like an amazing experience for a top like national team at an Olympic level. But then it sounds like in Namibia, it was like a very different type of sporting activity. I think that's the great thing about sports, is you can have elite performance, and then you can have kind of community and grassroots. And so it seems like, you've had a bit of each in your career. How did China happen? How did India happen once you had kind of moved on from university?
I'll tackle China first. So graduated university. This was in 2008, and was looking for work like everybody coming out of university, and found randomly on an Australian jobs board, someone was looking to hire sports coaches in Shanghai in China. So I reached out to the guy pretty blindly, but kind of trusted him, and he booked me a plane ticket, a one-way ticket out to Shanghai, and I went over there and was basically teaching swimming. I was teaching multi-sport, and also a little bit of football as well. But we would basically go to different compounds where expat families were living across Shanghai, and we would do after school sort of sports activities and classes with kids. with a little bit of coaching at some international schools. So the Singapore International School, for example, we went and worked and did some soccer with them. But it was a big eye-opening experience for me. I think, just culturally, language, as soon as I sort of landed in Shanghai and started to try and navigate myself around the city, quickly realized how challenging that was. But great, brilliant experience for me. I really needed to, and I really sort of pushed myself out of my comfort zone. But this is where I also met my wife, Stephanie, who originally from the US. She had also just recently graduated, and she was teaching English in Shanghai. But we met pretty early on in our experience of living there. And something that stood out to me was how well organized she was, because we got into a taxi one evening, and she had printed out and laminated a dress on a little card, in Mandarin, and handed that to the taxi driver, as opposed to trying to maybe explain, while we were trying
I got to stick
to
with
figure
her,
out.
right?
Yeah, I mean, it
More
was
reasons than
incredible.
one.
And then she had a bunch. She didn't just have her address; she had a bunch of different places. So yeah, that was incredible. And yeah, we were both having a very similar experience, but amazing to have to meet each other. And I spent a year working with the coaching company, and it was a brilliant experience. It was difficult. It was tough. It was actually a lot of hours and a lot of traveling across the city. We went all over. And so my second year, we ended up living there for 2 years. I worked for a local, they would call themselves, it was the Shanghai High School, but they had an international division. And I was the first ever foreign PE teacher they had hired. They wanted to sort of trial that as a new sort of addition to their PE team. And so part of my remit was to obviously teach PE, but I also was to work with the PE teachers at the school on a little bit of language sort of development, but also just looking at different coaching methods and introducing them to different things that I had in my background and my experience, and sort of had a bit of a minor focus of physical education at university. So that was incredible. And that was probably the best part of that whole experience of being there for 2 years, was working with my fellow PE teachers. And it definitely, I always explain this to people, that it took a long time for them to sort of really open up. And if in a way sort of trust me, because I was coming in new, and that hadn't been done before. But we definitely found some common ground, and really kind of got to know each other better. And we had an incredible experience. And it would have been fun if I was able to stay there a little bit longer, because I felt we could have achieved even more. But what we did achieve in that 1 year was great. And I actually had a friend from university, he was a year below me, actually come in and take over that job. So he moved out to Shanghai, and he took over my role, and they've continued that ever since. So nice to sort of know there's a little bit of a legacy of that continuing.
Yeah.
But China was a very some formative years, and a great to have met my wife there. And then, yeah, following China, I wanted to move back to the UK. London was really in the midst of preparing for the Olympics. So this was around 2010, and I was really desperate to get involved in that. I mean, as soon as we won the bid, I just knew, these opportunities don't come around a lot in your home country. And I was really proud of the bid and the way in which London sort of put themselves forward, that I knew I wanted to be involved in that. And just in the time, the age that I was at, the time in my career, I just felt like it would be a good place to be. So I applied for probably close to 20 different roles with the organizing committee for the Olympics, and only got one interview for one of those jobs, which turned out to be just the best possible scenario, because a lot of the other jobs would have been good, but they wouldn't have been as good as the one that I got.
I wanna stop you real quick on that, because I don't know about everybody watching and listening, but I've definitely been on some of those job database sites of like big organizations. So you're talking about like the Olympic Committee, whether it's a FA in a different country, it could be various Olympic departments and things. And like, I don't know, at least for me, as soon as I get on there, there's these mixed feelings of like, wow, how interesting, how cool would it be to get this role? And then it's like, okay, what's the likelihood? Because these are like everybody wants this type of role, and there's tons of people. So I'm sure it took you a lot of time, and for anyone who's been in a job hunt type of situation, it can be a really soul crushing experience. So like what was going through your, like was it like, hey, if this works, cool, if not, like, and what makes you say it kind of was the best possible, I guess first, like what would be your advice for people who are the same thing in the
Yeah.
US? We've got World Cup coming,
Yes.
there's
Yeah.
Copa America, there's a lot of big things. So what would you say to somebody who wants like that kind of, you know top, like with a big organization like that?
It's a really good point. And yeah, to take me back to that time, I do remember looking on it was called the LOCOG, which was the London Organizing Committee website. I feel at that point it was really for me just a numbers game, right? Because I just had to just keep applying for jobs, and just trying to tweak my applications where I could for those specific roles. But yeah, I think for now for the US, I mean, it's super exciting because there's a ton of stuff, but you've just got to apply for as many different things as you can, and maybe some you don't feel like you maybe have the necessary experience for, or but once you're in, you can
Mm-hmm.
then you can then get that experience. And there's many people that I've worked with at London that are still involved in the movement at various different levels and at very different places around the world. So once you've got in, and once you've had the experience, and once you've worked there, you can definitely, that is a career within itself, staying within
Yeah.
in the movement
Yeah.
of the games things. But yeah, it's to not give up. It's to I had to take up a job in London working at a burger restaurant, which I feel like for anybody, right, working in a restaurant is a great experience in itself. But yeah, I had to sort of make that kind of sacrifice and work, whilst I was trying to wait for an opportunity and a break from the Olympics.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, that it finally did come, and it came for a role that I didn't know much about. And I remember seeing the title; it was NOC and NPC volunteer coordinator. And I didn't even know what NOC and NPC stood for, right? When I was basically applying for it. And then obviously you do your research and your preparation for the interview. And it was basically the department that looks after all of the National Olympic committees and National Paralympic committees. There's a dedicated team that supports all of the countries basically through them,
Hmm.
through their whole journey through the Olympics. And they required, it's changed now, but that back then, each country was allotted a certain number of volunteers to help support them throughout the Olympics, from when the country arrived, meeting them at the airport, being with them in the athletes' village, taking the athletes to events, supporting them, helping the delegation right through to when they leave. So it was a really big volunteer role that the volunteers had. And to put it to some numbers, we had over 1,000 volunteers just for the Olympics. And so
Hmm.
certain delegations, the US, for example, would get 12 volunteers. That was the maximum. Smaller nations would get, 1 to 2 volunteers. But we had to do a huge recruitment drive. There was a huge recruitment drive in general for volunteers for the games, but specifically for our department. And because it required the biggest amount of a commitment from a volunteer compared to other volunteer roles, it was a really difficult one to find the right fit, in addition to people that maybe speak languages,
Yeah, because
have
yeah, you got
the,
people who are
the
like
sort of,
directly interacting with the athletes, with
yeah.
representatives from the countries and things. It's not just, yeah. It's so
So
you're looking for someone with some tact and culture. So you're trying to evaluate the right people there, and again, you drawing on some of your background.
yeah, and then and then we did the matching process of matching volunteers to all the countries, letting them know who their assigning is. And then we went through a rigorous, it was around 4 months of training. There was 4 different modules that volunteers had to attend. Each session was 2 to 3 hours in length, so it's a lot of knowledge that you're sort of giving to these volunteers to empower them. They had to also be pass driving tests, so they had to be a driver as
Mm.
well. They had to drive some of the delegation around. So incredible role. And then come to the actual game time. we were all based in the Athletes Village, and these volunteers. I mean, I had an incredible experience working on the games, but these volunteers had probably an even more amazing time just because the closeness and the things that they got to
100%.
do. Yeah. So I mean, it was an incredible opportunity, and I think to go back to your point, of applying for stuff, and sort of just you've just got to have you've got to apply. You got to get in there first, right? And don't give up. And sometimes some roles can maybe not happen until closer to the actual event time. Sometimes they're years out, but once you're involved, you'll have a great experience. And if it's something you enjoy, then you could possibly look at it as a career moving forward and working on other events. But had an amazing time. The Paralympics also, comes very quickly after the Olympics, very different, but equally as an amazing experience, and opportunity, and if anything, sometimes even more rewarding and sort of in a way different environment, way more of a community feel, versus the Olympics. So yeah, incredible time, and really a lot of very, very fond memories from that period of my life.
Yeah, very cool. And again, just with that example with the Olympics, we see kind of your background in not only the elite performance, but also, let's say, of course, Paralympics is not grassroots. These are incredible athletes in their own right.
Exactly.
But let's say maybe not, let's say like the athletics that aren't quite fully in the spotlight, right? But are still very impactful to people, that are huge part of people's lives, that, in those contexts, give people, a reason to really try to reach their potential, and then inspire their family and friends and community. So I've seen a lot of like really interesting parallels from your background. But this is because football. I want to talk about football.
Yes,
I'm
definitely.
going to move it away, and water polo. I never thought we'd get so much shine and spotlight to water polo. We've got it. We've got the broader Olympic games and everything. But yeah, let's kind of move over to football.
In India, this was post the Olympics. My wife and I went to go and live there in Mumbai. She was running a travel tour operator, which had a really great setup in that 80% of its profits funded its sister NGO, which was did and delivered programs in one of Asia's most densely populated slums, which is Dharavi in Mumbai. And I was part of their sport program, director of their sport programs there. And one of those programs was resurrecting a girls' football program that had originally started, had sort of fizzled out, and I was there to sort of help revive it and bring it back. So that was an incredible opportunity for me to start something from basically from scratch, and was a series of sort of getting recruiting and sort of working in the community to gain interest and get girls that were interested in doing doing football. And basically started that from a handful of girls that showed initial interest to I was there for 2 years. We grew the program up to close to around 100 girls that were participating in that program weekly.
That's awesome.
And I think one of the, and I was very early in my career in terms of program development and starting something. So I was trying a ton of different things to see what worked, see what curriculum, coaching things, so it was a real trial and error sort of process for me. Good sort of, place to work out a few things. But I think one of the biggest breakthroughs we had, and I have to attribute this to a volunteer that we had. Her name was Shnika, and she came via a Watson fellowship from the US. So she was traveling around the world for a year, working with different sport organizations. But she came and she worked with me for around 4 months. And she wanted to try and encourage the mothers of the girls to come and play as well. So she just found that through speaking to them and spending a little bit of time with them, realizing they had played a little bit of sport. I mean, it's still such a there's still such a stigma and taboo around girls' involvement in sport in India anyway. That sometimes for many women it was a very short glinting moment of their childhood where they really got to play any kind of sport. So, you know, I think through her spending time with the mothers and seeing how much the girls were really enjoying the program, she then got to invite them to come and play. And we used to practice actually in the slum in a very small school playground, and it was not ideal. The ground was terrible. It was basically all just stones, and it just wasn't a great setup, but it's what we had, and you know, we just made do. But we tried to get a few of the mothers to come there, and they said, no way, like we cannot be seen in our community playing football. So we looked at an alternative, and we found an actual small soccer field, kind of not too far from Dharavi, and we started taking the mums with the girls to practice once a week. And it was just, yeah, it was incredible. It was one of those moments where you're like, okay, this is what this is all about. And it was so, I think the best part was seeing the girls, seeing their mums playing and how much fun they were having, you know. And, you know, we kept the session separately, but that was just such a cool moment. And fast forward to last year, actually early last year, my wife and I were and our son, we were in India for an extended period of time traveling, and we were in Mumbai. I sent a few text messages to some of the now young women that were involved in that program in the early days, and we got together, and about 20 of them showed up, and we went and played football together, and it was just a really cool experience to sort of catch up with them, see what they're up to in their lives now. Many are sort of married and sort of going on to careers and things like that. And a couple, which was so great, are still involved in football. One in particular is coaching and heavily involved in the sport, which is just incredible. So, you know, the program is actually still not running anymore, which is a shame. But that time and that period and that group of players that we had and that time together was really quite exceptional, and it was really fun to sort of meet up with them and know that there was an impact there, you know, even though it was
for sure. That's very much a full circle moment, you know, especially
exactly, yeah.
You know, one of the girls went on to coach, and now so then you have impact to the next generation. And I love that story because it's a really brilliant, and it shows the kind of the emotional intelligence and also like the cultural awareness that this volunteer you mentioned, Shanika, had of kind of realizing after talking to the moms that like, hey, there might be a desire and interest there, but in the right situation, in the right context, they can't be seen in their own community. It's too little too exposed, a little too close, but being able to find a solution for that so they can get the benefit out of it, and then having that reinforced. That I think that's just a really cool idea. I can think of like, you know, not too many programs where they're working like kind of intergenerationally like that. And although they were training separately, you know, you're seeing each group not only are they getting the physical fitness and they're, you know, expressing themselves and being able to move their body and kind of learning and enjoying that experience, but then able to like impact each other. That sounds like really unique and an awesome experience for you to be a part of, obviously, and to facilitate too.
And also it was a good chance to sort of create sort of programming and get, you know, for this new chapter of my life, which then took us to Chattanooga. So 2015, my wife and I, my wife is from Chattanooga, so that's what took us there. And I had known about the Chattanooga Football Club because they've been around since 2009, but never really been to any of the games or sort of got involved with the team at any capacity until that summer of 2015, when they were having probably one of the seasons of their lives in what was then the NPSL, reaching the NPSL final. And I was trying to look it up before, but I still think it holds true today that they still hold the record for the highest attendance for an amateur soccer match in the United States. Okay. Because we had I made a note of it because I always forget the actual figure of the actual attendance, so I want to kind of get that correct. But yeah, there was a crowd of 18,000 people that came to that game. Okay. And it was against New York Cosmos B, and it was in Chattanooga at Finley Stadium. And yeah, from just new to the US, arriving into the US, coming into a small southern city, and seeing that they have this great football club was just like a dream come true. And they had an incredible run that summer, and then had this huge big national final. Unfortunately, they lost. It was a really, really close game, but an incredible night for the city, for the community, but also for amateur soccer, in the US at that time as well. And just showing that at that level, at the NPSL, which you could say is level 4, right, of US soccer,
Mm-hmm.
that you can get such support and community energy, around a team. So later that year, the club formed the Chattanooga Football Club Foundation. And just given my previous experience that we've been sort of talking about, I was already in talks with the club about getting involved. They didn't really have any full-time staff at that point because they were just an amateur team playing in the summer. But the foundation presented an opportunity for myself to get involved, and they had this idea of an after-school health initiative that I said, hey, give me that and let me run with it, and we'll see what we can do. So come the spring of 2016, I kind of put some more structure around that sort of program when we launched it at 3 elementary schools in Chattanooga. And I then was given the opportunity to present to Volkswagen, who were already synonymous with the club because we have a plant in a Volkswagen plant in Chattanooga. And Volkswagen's been on the front of the jersey sort of ever since 2009. So presented the project, gave them the scope, gave them the vision of what I wanted to create and how I wanted to replicate and grow the program. And they gave us $100,000 and said, you have a year to sort of see what you can do and show us if you can grow it. And we started that program in the spring, like I said, with 3 schools, and then we quickly grew that to sort of 9 schools in the fall. And had an incredible journey with that program over the years. So up until when I left that role a few years ago, we were at over 30 schools and in a few different regions across Chattanooga, which was incredible. Yeah. So and really kind of got a really good sustainable model. Continued the funding coming through from Volkswagen. They increased it year on year, which was incredible. And also started to do some new additional programming, which I can go into. But yeah, that really, moving to Chattanooga was a great move for us. But I'm very thankful for the founders of the club that got me involved very early on, especially on the foundation side, and had an incredible journey.
Yeah, that's massive growth. That's massive impact too of 30 schools. Like even a few is impactful. So for you to kind of grow that and shepherd that program on is huge. And it's something I love to hear because I really think that clubs like soccer clubs in the US have an opportunity to, and this is what traditionally happens in many countries. Like now I'm in Argentina and there's a lot of clubs that have schools, right? Like they literally have let's say you had a Chattanooga school, right? That just kind of is run under the umbrella of the club. And it's a way to be a part of people's lives. And I think it's something that traditionally soccer has always done historically in Europe, in South America. It's always been like grown literally like out of neighborhoods. And so I think it's something that obviously the game has the ability to do, and I think that clubs at any level of the pyramid have kind of a responsibility to do. And obviously in connecting with people and growing the game and getting more deeper, like ingrained into the culture of local areas. And like 18,000 for NPSL is incredible. Like I know some teams in the Philadelphia area, and 1% of that would be pretty impressive. Like you usually get some of the parents and things, maybe you get like 50 people or so. Every once in a while they might do like a local club night, and maybe you get like 500 would be like a big night. So to pull in like 18,000 for an amateur game is unbelievable. And so Again, we see you like working within that grassroots aspect, and it's amazing that you guys had the backing and the funding. Having a bit of a nonprofit background myself, I know how important it is to have those grants, to have
Yeah.
be able to offer scholarships, to be able to do things like that, to administer and actually run your programs, in addition to donations from the community and things. And then where does like the operations and the bigger like connection to the club come in as far as creating game day experience? Like you guys obviously had that kind of feather in your hat of hey, we have one of the, if not the, certainly a top few highest ever attendance for amateur. So where did that situation come in, and like what type of things did you guys start to do on the fan experience, the fan engagement side of the club?
Yeah, no. So my rise with the club, it sort of came through first being volunteering and sort of just helping out with our game day operations very early on, when I first moved to Chattanooga. And then, I was working on the community program full time. That was my full time job, and over the years, just gradually got more and more involved, with the football club. And it was a really, interesting time, because we were going through a lot of change in terms of there was so much momentum and support from the community, and interest around the team, that just made us feel like we need to start looking at a sort of longer term strategy, and move from the amateur ranks into a more semi-pro, potentially pro sort of space and league. And so and we started adding a lot more games outside of our regular season as testers, to sort of feel how would they be supported, and we always got great kind of support from those. For example, we had Atlanta United, their very first game actually, before they entered into MLS. They came up and played a friendly against us, and I think we had close to sort of 12 to 14,000 fans come to that game, which was just amazing. And that was in an
Incredible.
was it late sort of January, early February sort of time. So, you really started to get a sense like, okay, that there's more here with the club,
And I'm going to
slowly.
interrupt you. I'm sorry, I got to interrupt you again. Like, what do you think that was? Because there were so many. I'm not an expert, but I'm going to wager, just knowing the game in the States, that there's probably a good 80 to 90% of clubs, and even you could even say like USL Championship, and a lot of MLS clubs are not exactly thick as thieves with their local communities even. But what do you think like were some of those factors that gave you that momentum?
I,
The
I
majority of organizations in the US are lucky to just survive a few years, let alone actually get some type of buy-in, which I think for me is so key. And so I'm really curious to hear what allowed you guys to do that.
I think it was Chattanooga in general. Just firstly, is I feel like it's such a collaborative, community supportive sort of city, from working there and living and working in different places around the world, right? Chattanooga is really unique in that respect, and there's a real cohesion, and a lot of people trying to help each other out. And then the brand, I think, from the very beginning, even the Chattanooga Football Club logo, if you see it, is fantastic. It was designed by one of the founders, who's a designer, had his own firm for a long time in Chattanooga. But I think that's been so strong from the very beginning, right? The identity and the brand has just been solid, that people love and really get behind. It's Chattanooga's thing. And then the support. We have the Chatahooligans, who organically support a
Hmm.
group, independent supporters group, that have just grown and are so unique, and just have their own approach to support, and a constant. That I think their thing is about constant noise and singing and songs and music, and right, from kickoff to when it's halftime, take a break. I think sometimes with other supporters groups and other sort of, you can have lulls in a game, right? And it also depends with
Hmm.
what's happening in the game, and it's a bit more reactive. They are a constant noise, which is incredible, and quite synonymous, I think, with a little bit with South American, culture as well.
Yeah.
But they, I think, have been a huge factor, and just again, just on top of everyone else, I think that just the general interest and love for soccer is just growing. And also we were at a nice sweet spot in Chattanooga. We have a minor league baseball team which does incredibly well, but there wasn't a huge amount of other options as well, right? So that I think really helped, draw people in, because it was and it was exciting. We were doing we were a team that has always been competitive, and that playoff nature, though, that I don't like it personally, coming from a different footballing culture.
Yeah, exactly.
I can't stand it. The kind of win a league, but then you still have to have a playoff to determine the overall winner. I don't love that model, but it does breed excitement, and we had some really great epic moments, and then also just the community focus, that the programs that we were doing in the community. So that's always been a big part of the club, and that was the owners from the beginning. They wanted to create a club, but it had to be equal amount of focus in the community as well. It couldn't just be all on the club. They wanted to be doing, they worked with local foundations to build soccer fields within the community as well, which has been a hub for a lot of programming. And then we also have an academy on top of that, which amalgamated a lot of smaller sort of clubs and sort of helped bring those together underneath the umbrella of the Chattanooga Football Club Academy, which has just been very successful over the years. And again, very community focused and driven. So there's a big ecosystem going on in Chattanooga. And I was just really lucky to get involved, and over the years just sort of take on more responsibilities. One of our proudest moments, I think, was when we did a supporters raise. So we were the first sports team. There was a change in the law. The Green Bay Packers, right, is a great example of where people have shares in the club, right? But they're not real, they're not actually real value, money attributed shares. It's more of a token sort of share sort of model that they have, but the one that's probably the most relevant. They changed laws several years ago so that actually sports clubs could open up and offer a fundraising, a raise for people to buy small shares in the club. So we did that in that was late 2018, early 2019. We raised close to $1 million and had 3,000 people purchase shares in the club.
Awesome.
And that we got people from every single state in the country, but also from around 18 different countries around the world as well. So that just bred a new life into the club of this shared ownership. We also, something that I was super proud of was ensuring that one of those owners got elected and has a seat on the board. So that is hugely important, I think, for our sort of fan and club engagement, to have that fan representation, supporter owners representation on the board to sort of bring up stuff and to be a voice on the board to sort of disseminate feedback information to our owners as well. There's been a lot of different factors, I guess, but for me personally, getting more and more involved in the game day side of things, just trying to, always the goal, right, I think for every club is to just put on the best possible show and the smoothest possible operation, so that fans come, have a seamless experience, but enjoy a great game, and leave happy and want to come back for more. So last year I took a brief hiatus, which I'm sure we'll talk about in a bit, but and then came back to the club last year and solely just focused on game day and fan experience. And we really started to sort of ramp that up. And I think that's been important because, we're a few more years along now in Chattanooga's sort of development, and there's a lot more other options, a lot more other things going on in the city, which is great, but there's a little bit more competition. And so we have to keep improving how we do things. And I was really, really proud of some of the things that we brought. So adding sort of live music, DJs and stuff like that, face painting, having a photo booth, interactive sort of events in and around the concourse, and really trying to go for that family sort of focus.
And when you talk about the fan experience, the situation with Chattanooga Football Club being in the city, it is a city, but it's also not like a massive metropolis with tons of options, as you mentioned. and there's a sense of community there. So certainly those are factors that help. But if I'm a club in the United States or really anywhere in the world trying to get a foothold and trying to connect with my community and trying to get more people in to see matches or just overall create more buzz, like could you give us one or two things, either a framework or some tips here to kind of keep in mind as kind of the foundations of creating that connection?
Yeah, no, it's a I think there's so many different ways in which you can go about it, but I think it also just simply comes back to, what I said right at the beginning as well about my previous experience with Exeter, in terms of just making it accessible. Is it easy to get to? And if it's not, okay, what are some ways in which you can help with that a little bit? Specifically, I know transportation, and this is something we've tried to work on in Chattanooga. We have thousands of kids that are in our community programs, but a lot of them live in different parts of the city and sometimes don't have access to transportation, or so trying to get people mobility, trying to get people to games is huge. So where can you kind of be creative around that? I love, there's a little bit of a tangent, but there's a great example in Atlanta, where there's a sport organization there called Soccer in the Streets, and they have this brilliant model where they've built soccer pitches next to metro stations.
I think
I
I've read
forget the name.
about that actually.
Yeah,
Yep.
and their whole premise there is, you provide a space, they can do programming at that particular station, but if you ever want to do competition, or have one community go and play another community, well, then they use the public network to get there, and there's no then barrier when they've got there to get to the actual field. So just linking some of those things up, I
You
think, is
mean it's
just
not
is
going to be this like extraterrestrial type of isolated vacuum of land somewhere in a farm
yes,
where
yeah,
when it rains it turns to an absolute mud pit and there's about 1,000 SUVs there like every
yeah,
other local community soccer situation? That's interesting. I'm not trying to be flippant and attack. I understand logistics are a huge part of US culture,
yeah.
but when possible, I really do love that model.
Yeah, so I think about thinking about that, thinking about mobility and how people get to your stadium is super, super important. And then yeah, I think it's always that cost, getting that cost and the affordability right. I'm really proud. I think the team at Chattanooga has done a great job this year at providing some really good options and tiered options, way more than that we've done in the past. To really try and help. They've worked with the public library, for example, in Chattanooga, where they've given the public library some season tickets so that people can go with their library card, check those tickets
Very
out and
cool.
use them. So getting creative with some of those kind of things, I think is super important. And then, yeah, I think your experience just has to be smooth, right? I think there's a lot of stadiums, especially in the US, but around the world, that do an incredible job at just making it very seamless. You don't have many issues getting in. It flows. And that I think is super, super important. One of the best experiences I had recently was actually in Mumbai last year, where I went to a game there, and the Indian Premier League in India, their league is really growing, and they're doing a phenomenal job. But the way in which you entered at this game in Mumbai, you came through this main entrance and you were funneled through this sort of corridor of just music and noise, and there was stools, and there was like the merch team, there was interactive games, there was partners with stuff that you could, giveaways and things like that. And there was really great visuals. They've worked with, they've got kind of great murals and sort of
Okay.
artwork of the city, so everything is dressed and looks uniformed. And that was, again, as a fan coming into that experience, you're like, wow, I've arrived at something. And that's so important. So I think there's so many different ways. I also look back to my Olympics experience as well. For example, they had volunteers on lifeguard chairs, really high up, and gave them megaphones, and they basically just told them to have at it. And so these volunteers were brilliant. It was comedy, it was fun interaction with the crowd. That there was a lot of long passageways and walkways to get to different venues and stadiums and such when you're dealing with such large amounts of people. But something as simple as giving someone a high chair and a megaphone, actually can have a great impact. And you see the smiles and you see the kind of banter that can happen in something that's pretty mundane. It's just walking in between a venue. So I love those. And yeah, just a final example of something really fun that we did in Chattanooga last year with one of our partners. So this is something I'm wanting to get into with clubs, is look at your partners, look at your sponsors that you work with, and how can you incorporate them more creatively within your game day experience. And it's a win-win for everybody. But we had a clothing company that is one of our partners who do super nice high-end sort of outdoor clothing. And so we pre-game, and also an incentive to try and draw people in to come to the game ahead of time, was we had a catwalk and we had a DJ, we had a smoke machine, and we had former players come and a couple of staff come out, walk the catwalk. We had fans all lining the catwalk, and come and walk. And one of the guys from the company was emceeing it and describing the clothing. They did a few giveaways. Brilliant. But it was so much fun. We did it again at halftime, so we had another opportunity to capture to new people that didn't see the first one. So I love that process of sort of getting creative, making things interactive, and just the possibilities are endless. But that's a few of the examples, I guess.
Yeah, and now you kind of find yourself, after having that experience with Chattanooga. Well, you mentioned you kind of had gone away for a little bit. So tell us about kind of that little hiatus, your little delayed gap year, and obviously connects with your current travels with your family.
Yeah, this was 2021, so we're still kind of in the midst of the pandemic and sort of slowly coming out of it. But Airbnb launched a program called the Live Anywhere program, and they put out a application for people to apply. It was 500 words, and my wife said, "Hey, should we give this a go and see if we can, I don't know, just see if we get a bite at this." And so she submitted her 500-word essay, and she went through series of interviews and rounds, and got selected, which was incredible. So they had some 300,000 people globally apply for this program.
Did she laminate her 500 words?
She didn't. No, she didn't. But, she actually very, very smartly. She actually built a website on the back end with way more information about us and linked that website within the 500 words. So
that's cheating, but it's clever.
A little tidbit of maybe that wouldn't fly with some other people, but I guess Airbnb liked that. And what was fun for us is we were actually able to track to see if people were clicking on the website. So we could see that there was a little bit of movement going on, which was exciting for us. But yeah, no, for 10 months, we were given a stipend on the program, and we had to spend at least a month in an Airbnb, but we could go anywhere in the world that we wanted to go. So we then spent 10 months traveling to various different countries, spending a month each time. And it was unbelievable, kind of pinch yourself sort of moment, that is this actually happening? And we both quit our jobs because we had been saving up to go travel for a year, but this just really fast forwarded it a little bit for us, and also gave us the right time to start a YouTube channel, which we had wanted to have done for a long time. And we love the travel space. We love watching a lot of other content creators that travel, and
which I believe it's Steph and Pete, right? So we got to go to Steph and Pete for all our family travel tips.
Yeah, thank you, Andrew. Yeah, Steph and Pete is the channel. And so we did that program. We extended it. We kept our travels going after the official Airbnb program finished, because we were just enjoying it so much, and just creating videos and doing that, with a brief stint back to Chattanooga last year for a few months. But we're now basing ourselves in Asia, working remotely, I'm sort of in the midst of starting out as a consultant myself, working with a few clubs back in the US, focusing on that game day fan experience like we've been talking about. But also looking to hopefully work with some clubs in Asia as well. For me personally, just trying to use my experience thus far of the various things that I've done, but really, keen to sort of work with clubs especially ones that are maybe more in the amateur side, looking where they have just a shorter window, but trying to be, trying to make that super successful for them. And it's all about kind of just, making sure fans are having a really great experience, increasing fan engagement, getting more fans to come. So yeah, I'm really excited. And if anyone listening, to the podcast is interested in chatting to me more about that, I'm sure Andrew will leave details, but very
For
easy
sure.
to.
Yep, we're gonna have all your contact info in the description here, and the different programs and things you've been a part of in your experience. It still show you can create a connection to the community, and often,
Yeah.
would you say that often like that community connection is like a necessary foundation, because you can do things like creating interactive experiences, like you said in
Yes. Yeah.
Mumbai, like great aesthetics and really making it a fun atmosphere. But if there's no initial interest, that isn't quite as effective.
No, definitely. And to back to that program, the after school program I started in Chattanooga, they also, I think sometimes people can feel that those are maybe sort of daunting or require a ton of money to set up. They really don't have to. They can be very simple programs, but easily replicable. I think our model in Chattanooga uh, was getting teachers from the schools involved in the coaching. So we provided them all, training through the US soccer coaches, sort of the foundational program courses that they offer, and getting grants from the USC to help fund those, and just preparing, giving them training and knowledge, but having teachers already there at the school that know the kids to run the program straight after school was pretty seamless, and that's how we really, once we figured that out, took us a little bit to get to that stage. Once we figured that out, that was really easy to go to other schools and be like, this is how this program operates.
Mm-hmm.
We pay the coach, we pay the teachers to coach, because I think that's also important, in the model. But it was super easy to replicate. And so those kind of things. But then you can really, you're talking about each school, you can have 30, sometimes 40 kids, but you put that on multiple schools, you can really, and then you're working in different geographies and you're starting to engage with those parents of those kids, you really are starting to spread the awareness of who you are as an organization.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that can have a real great trickle down sort of effect, and be done pretty simply and without a huge amount of work or money up front, So I think that's super, that's super important. And it's also back to that point of accessibility, right? That program that we ran, there was a registration fee, but it was $10, and that was it for the whole season. Nearly 10 years on, like it's still just $10 registration fee, and it doesn't have to be a lot. But I think that's hugely a big part of, if you're wanting to do something, it doesn't take a lot to get something started,
Yeah. Yeah. Awesome. No, yeah. And again, speaking to the kind of the simple truth of just trying to be able to support people or just introduce kids to the game. I think that applies certainly in the U.S., but also in Asia as well, where there's not always the structure. You think of in India, where cricket is top
Yeah.
dog there, and so just we've talked to some coaches from India and who have worked within India. And it's just trying to expose people to the game and get involved. And so I think there's football is already the world's biggest sport, but there's still like a lot of room to grow in many parts of the world
Yes.
and many places. And whether it is that, or maybe we see an unexpected rise from water polo or any of the other
Yeah.
sports, as long as we're giving people an opportunity to kind of to get together, to compete, to play, to learn things, use their bodies, and then try to bring everyone together through that. I think is the goal. So awesome. So Pete, we appreciate your time here. The way we finish each episode with our guests is, could you please finish the sentence "because football"?
Yeah. Because football. Because football, it's personally changed my life and put me onto a really interesting, fulfilling, fun, great way of living, I guess is a good way to put it.
Yeah, no, for sure. I can identify many of those watching can, and if it hasn't yet, it has the potential to. As many of our guests attest to, it's a ticket to take us all over the world, or even just get deeper connected with people in our own backyard. So awesome, Pete. If anyone is listening and wants to reach out to you about community programs, fan engagement, operations of club, what's the best way to reach you?
Yeah, best way is connect me through email. So it's just Peter Woolcock at gmail.com. That's the best way to get a conversation started. And yeah, we're always open to talking to people about obviously the game day fan experience, but also all of the other areas of my experience that I've worked on as well that we've covered. But yeah, that's reach out to me there. And Andrew, thank you. I mean, I know we said before we started recording, but really appreciate you having me on, but also the great job that you're doing with the podcast. I'm really enjoying it. I've been listening to the other podcasts that you've done with guests, and giving people an opportunity to talk about their journeys and what they're up to around the world. So keep up the great work, sir.
Appreciate it, Pete. And yeah, he was not paid to say that. Everybody, he volunteered that, and we appreciate it. But yeah, we'll definitely include whether you guys are listening on Spotify, watching on YouTube, or listening on any of our other podcast sites, Google Podcasts, Apple Podcasts. The email, is linked in, so you can check out more of his background. Will also be in the description, as well as the link to your guys' family YouTube channel as well, Steph and Pete. Make sure to take a look. Any of you with wanted to do some more world traveling with your family, you're going to find the best tips and clues from them. So, Pete, thanks again so much
Awesome.
for being on the podcast. So we appreciate it. And everyone else, thanks for listening. Please like, subscribe, leave a comment here about what you got from our conversation, and we'll see you on the next episode.